Let's talk a little bit about dramatic works in English language arts and literature in grades 5 and 6. As you know, this is a relatively new addition to the expectations around text forms and structures. And in grade 5 and 6, we can see that we're really just introducing this idea of dramatic works to students. So, what does the learning outcome ask? Students need to examine how text, genres, forms, and structures support and enhance communication. Now, remember that text forms and structures is a very large outcome. And so we need to keep in mind some of these key terms, knowing, of course, that genre is how we classify or categorize different texts. But specifically, I want to talk about forms and structures. When we're talking about form, think format. So it's how the text is presented to the reader. So a short story, a poem, a script, an essay, a play, a movie, whatever it is, that is what we're talking about when we're talking about form. When we're talking about structure, we're talking about how it's organized. It's the way the writer has framed their ideas. And there are many, many examples of structure in literature. So it could be something like compare and contrast, somebody wanted but so, writing things in a chronological order. A paragraph itself is a structure. So as we see this word structure throughout the learning outcome, keep in mind that we're talking about organization. When we're talking about this idea of dramatic works, some of you might automatically think play, and you're not wrong. When we're talking about a dramatic work, we're talking about some kind of a text where the plot and characters are developed through dialogue and action. Now, there's a little bit of division in the definition of dramatic works and whether or not film fits under that umbrella. The Canadian Copyright Association says it does, so we're going to run with that. Ultimately, any text that is intended to be performed dramatically for an audience can be considered a dramatic work. So, of course, that could be a play. It could also be a dance performance. It could be the opera. It could be the actual script or screenplay that we're looking at. It could be a movie, a TV show, readers' theater, radio plays, anything where we've got some performance piece happening in a way to communicate the information. That is a dramatic works. So when we look at the examples of dramatic works, we actually see lots and lots of options for us to pick from. So let's look at those expectations for grade 5 first. Students are expected to develop this understanding that drama is a literary form. So it's a type of literature that can artfully express stories and ideas. So what does that mean, or what is it that they need to do here? Well, the first thing that we look at here in the skills and procedures, they have to listen to, read, or highlight, underline, blinking lights, or view a dramatic work, which means they don't have to do every one of those things. You can pick one. So let's say I pick view, or because we're looking at radio plays, specifically maybe one with a science fiction edge to it, because that's a genre I need to explore, we're going to listen to it. And we're doing that to learn about artful expression of stories and ideas. So that's the why in our engagement of this text form. Students also need to examine main characters and events in a variety of dramatic works. And so we can go to the knowledge column and see that when we're talking about these events related to drama or dramatic works, we're talking about how the dialogue and action help develop these things. So unlike in a story where we're reading description or we're reading things about the plot or the character, we're learning about these things in a dramatic work through the dialogue and action, as opposed to the description that we might see in a prose text. And we also learn about characters, and a lot is communicated through verbal, nonverbal, and paraverbal language, which of course connects back to the organizing idea around oral language. So what could this look like? You could extend that understanding from oral language, verbal, nonverbal, paraverbal, to examine artful expressions of stories and ideas. In other words, how do those three forms of communication contribute to the story? Another idea, as you watch, read, or listen to the dramatic work, look at how dialogue and action help us understand the plot. Lastly, you can ask students to think about how we learn about the character through the dramatic work. How would we describe the character? And what's the evidence I have to support that description? Now, this idea of characterization also exists in text forms and structures under fiction. So I would be extending the conversation or extending the learning that I've done with my short story or the novel. Ultimately, we're wanting students to realize that things are done on purpose in text development so that we can learn about characters. And when we're looking at a dramatic work, dialogue and action help build those things, as does verbal, nonverbal, and paraverbal communication. What about grade 6? The learning outcome in grade 6 gets slightly more complicated in that we need to see how text form and structure, so those same terms are coming up again, clarifies information and supports the connections we can make with self, others, and the world. So in grade 5, we were looking at how the format and the organization support and enhance communication. And we're leveling it up in grade 6 to talk about how that form or format and organization clarifies information and helps us build connections. The expectations in grade 6, and when we look at the KUSPs, we're trying to figure out or explore how forms of drama can influence the outcome of the story being represented. Because we're talking form equals format, I think a better word choice might be here that genres of drama. So the categorization of a drama as a comedy or a tragedy makes a little bit more sense here. So how does the fact that it's a comedy or the fact that it's a tragedy influence the outcome of the story being represented? Again, when we look at skills and procedures here, that magical word of or means that we can listen to, read, or view dramatic works, including comedy and tragedy. Specifically, in grade 6, we're looking at the narrative structure in a dramatic works. So how does the story unfold? How is it organized? And building a sense and understanding around that structure that we see in a play or in a dramatic work. A really important note here. This is not black and white. Many stories include elements of comedy and tragedy, and it might actually prove easier for you to explore dramatic works from this perspective. So we're not looking for a pure comedy or a pure tragedy. We're actually looking for hints of those things as we're looking at a particular dramatic work. You do not need to teach Shakespeare in order to meet the expectations of this KUSP. You are welcome to do that. We have the professional autonomy in our classrooms to make those decisions. But consider that if students are able to identify elements of a comedy and tragedy in some samples in grade 6, say, they may be better prepared for more sophisticated texts like Shakespeare in the future. So what could this look like? The first thing that comes to mind is this idea of comparing narrative structures of dramatic works and narrative structures that we see in, say, a novel or another narrative story text. So how are they the same? How are they different? And as you view, listen to, or read the dramatic work, plotting out what exactly the narrative structure of the dramatic work is. Alternatively, or in addition, you could also consider the intent of the learning outcome when we're looking at the play, the TV show, the movie. How does the text form and structure? So, how does the format, the fact that it's a play, and how it's organized, that dramatic works organization structure, how does it clarify information? How does that text form and structure, again, support the connections you make to self, others, and the world? So, how is it that the fact that it's a dramatic work, that it's a play, that it's a script, that it is a TV show or movie, help you, the consumer of the text, connect and make connections to help build that understanding to self, others, in the world? You could also introduce the concept of drama genres by sharing a clip from Stranger Than Fiction. If you're not familiar with this movie, the main character, Harold Crick, suddenly starts to hear a narrator, and the narrator reveals that this character is about to die. And so he is seeking support on what to do about the situation, that all of a sudden he has a narrator in his head. And he seeks out someone who walks him through a variety of genres to decide if he is in a comedy or if he's in a tragedy. Because, of course, depending on what genre he's in, the ending of the film or his life will look very different. The other thing you can do is explore how the timing of the end of a story can impact if it's a comedy or a tragedy. So let's think about the film Frozen. If the film ended right after one of the main characters gets frozen, that of course would be a tragedy. Thankfully, Disney does not wrap up films in that way. And so the movie continues. Spoiler alert, she doesn't stay frozen. So we can talk about how the timing of the end can impact how we view this particular dramatic work. The other thing that you can do is, as the students are exploring the narrative structure of the play or the TV show or the movie, have them chart elements of comedy and tragedy that they see. So picture the plot diagram, the good old like flat triangle mountain flat. And as they're plotting out the plot points, have them put in little stars of where something funny happens or when something sad or tragic happens along the way, so they can see how those elements play out over the course of the dramatic work.